Thanks, Parit, for that enlightening presentation. As always, I remember in 2022, I had asked Parit to do a presentation on 3 Rs, R as in recycle, reduce, and reuse. I remember that intense presentation that he had. It's not that we do not have the technology or we do not have the science around. All that matters is that when do we put our heads together. One thing we mentioned is also about collaboration. When we put our heads together to really start implementing some of these innovations which are around us, which are actually in the need of the hour. Let me come to straight into the questions. As Parisha said, that today's generation is not buying any products. What they're buying is stories. So Nick, are you buying stories? And the question, the other part of the question to Raphael is, are you selling stories? Nick, start.
Good afternoon. I'll say yes and no. So we are buying.
Explain.
We're buying quality and quality in stories. Yes. So I'll give an example. One of our most successful lines in flowers is fair trade. And the reason it's selling is because of the story behind it. Is because people want to feel, as much as people want to know where what they're buying is coming from, they also want to know what they're doing. So they do not mind paying more for a story. And so it's story, but it has to be backed with quality.
Yeah, I think that's what mentioned. Credible story with credible actions. Like if someone tells me that the avocado that you eat is fully organic, how do I determine that? Of course, people today talk about technology innovations. People today talk about blockchain to trace the provenance of that produce in terms. I think it is being done at least in some pilot projects in some parts of the world. But yes, I'm willing to pay that extra premium for a story that I'm convinced about it. Raphael, are you selling stories, emotions, narratives, or just flowers?
Good evening, everyone. I'm first pleased to see that there's a beautiful flower in front of every table. That shows that we are also selling stories, because you see the beauty. And again, I'm pleased to sit in front of. I'll be cautious because Nick is my customer. And on the other side is our box maker. So anyway, for us, we endeavor to ensure that we produce products in a good way, so that it's not only about production, but producing in a humane, ethical, and a good way, so that the stories Nick sell, actually he buys a story from me and then he sells. So the origin of the story is the grower, which is us, and we don't just endeavor to do because of the customer, but because of the humanity and the environment, and we all live in this environment. You don't live in Mars and Moon, so that's.
Yeah, that's actually true, that if all of us are convinced of the fact that we are selling stories, and if we do our bit, and I think there can be a chain reaction as to, yes, I sell a story, I sell a product that is produced in the best of the circumstances environment, and then since somebody else buys that, and I think that story spread, and it's a good story that is getting spread. Parit, I want to pick your brain on something that you mentioned about to what extent are you willing to push the envelope to get some of these things done. There is science, there is innovation available there. It's a matter of getting that collaboration across the value chain. And I think it is a lot to do with as well perception. Now, there is so much good things talked about the Kenyan flower industry. We heard it in the previous presentation. You're on talking about it. The Kenyan flowers compete on the global market with the South American, but there seems to be some sort of a perception as to the flowers coming from Kenya do lack in terms or fail to compete with their counterparts from South America in terms of maybe packaging, in terms of quality of packaging, transport, cold chain integrity. But from your experience, how can we change that perception?
Okay, there are two, I would say there are two parts to that question. We, in 2018, a few of us went to Miami to study the Colombian and the Ecuadorian supply into Miami and see how Kenyan flowers would reach the US and how they would behave and what is expected. And what we discovered from my personal point of view, because I was looking at the packaging element only, was that there is nothing special that the guys in South America are doing in terms of paper choice and paper and box design. There's nothing special. What they're doing differently is the way in which they pack, the way in which they store their packaging before they use it, the way in which packaging is supplied to them. So these are the small things that make the difference. And also the paper choice which they make, and they're willing to pay a premium for that particular paper choice, which is not the case with our local market, which we were supplying to. In terms of the other part of the pushing the envelope, if I go back to the last conference where we talked of the 3 Rs and the alternatives to box making as we saw it then, I raised the question, or I planted a seed to ask if plastic boxes would ever be adopted as opposed to paper boxes. And this is a question maybe for grower and buyer, that if I put it to you and said to you that I have recovered plastic from the environment, made a product from it, it is going to perform better than a paper box, more consistently and regularly, and at the other end, it's going to be crushed, brought back to me, be made again into a box, and that cycle will never end, thereby reducing your carbon footprint overall, because the carbon footprint of paper is higher than plastic. I think we were looking at it on Google earlier, and it was 3.5 times. So if that is a storyline where you're saying to someone, the packaging used in this particular product was from the environment which is no longer there. It has now been used to package something. It's not compromised the package, it's actually enhanced it. After use, it's going to go back in a crushed form, be made again into a plastic product, and that cycle will continue. And we all know why plastic is scorned upon, because it doesn't die. Well, the fact that it doesn't die means it can be recycled and reused. Whereas the paper product, for it to be a good box, has to be made from virgin fiber, which is a new tree every time a box is made. So you're cutting trees, you're not replenishing them fast enough. You're then going to have that box traveling, or that paper traveling from maybe Northern Europe or South America or South Africa, all the way to Kenya, being made into a box, being taken back to Europe, and at that point it is thrown away and made into the second generation of paper products. So the question I have for both of you in regarding this story, this narrative is, if the innovation led you to a solution which allows you, or which prompts you to change the narrative on your product lines and say, okay, we are not only fair trade, but we are also looking at our carbon footprint holistically and saying to ourselves, we recover waste and we stop it becoming waste. What would be the buyer-seller viewpoint on that? I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I'm just asking you for your initial thoughts. Would it be something that you could buy and you could sell to your customer?
Who wants to go, Nick or Raphael? I think it's also it's also an age of a conscious buyer, conscious seller, conscious grower, conscious business operator, conscious businessman. I think there is a reflection. You're holding a mirror in front of you and looking at, am I a conscious operator in the business? Probably it's not like putting anyone in the spot. It is not always possible to do all that, what we speak from a pedestal, from a stage, but I think we have to make a conscious effort to move towards something like that.
And I do agree that this is going against the grain. The grain is paper that is better than plastic.
Yes. So the paper is better than plastic, and I think the perception is as well. Paper is better than plastic, and so I think the journey towards changing the perception is where the work is. Before you get to the point of implementing such a project. If you look at countries, some of the countries in Europe are taxing any paper shipments into their countries, plastic. So they will still tax you for importing anything in a paper box. At the end of the day, at the perception level, it's already an expensive affair. We're looking at cost effectiveness here as we look at sustainability. In the long run, amazing if you can prove the concept. But the perception at the moment is that paper is better than plastic.
No, and I agree with you. And being a paper box maker, I love it.
Yeah, that was a business that Parisha thrived for. So now he's advocating just the opposite. Raphael, is that something that comes into your strategy, into your thought in terms of plastic is better than paper?
I think for us, the growers, is provided he can accept and provided the logistic part can really do it well, because again, we need also the logistic of going and coming. Are the freighters willing to do both and still being cost effective? Because I think if you look again how the paper comes, it comes by sea and then it goes by air. But this one, I don't know whether it will come by sea and then goes by air or both. So the concept for me is provided it is accepted by the customer, again, it's friendly and it is cost effective, because at the end of the day, you need to ensure that the product we are carrying has a lot of competitive advantage, competitiveness again outside there. So provided that markup still is good, it's still positive on our side.
We are still on the topic of packaging, but also the larger topic of our discussion is the quality challenge in the flower trade. I like to keep this interaction with the audience. Please do step in if you have a comment or a question. I know there are growers, there are shippers, there are freight forwarders, there are airlines, airports representatives within the audience. If there are anything specific, it is a matter of collaboration, because Parisha can come back again next year, do another fantastic presentation, probably will be talking to us the same thing. I will push him to do something on the innovation, and he will tell me that, Reji, this is going to be the same. What we need is implementation, the feasibility of doing something that we have been talked about. What is holding back besides the collaboration? Is the cost an important factor? And who can be the champion of something like this in the flower industry? Who can really lead this? Because I think probably there must be a hesitation, like who will make the first move. Parish, have you really thought about something like that? Who can champion this cause?
Okay, let me answer that with historical knowledge. Two big changes in packaging systems in Kenya. One is palletizing, one is sea freight. Were driven by funding from an NGO or a government agency or a major interested party like Flora Holland, right? So those were the two big sponsors of this change. And money was used for various parts of that project, whether they paid for the first batch of boxes or whatever they did in that system. So money always is a matter of restraint in terms of moving things forward. The other thing is also accessibility to information. As a developer of packaging materials, I need to know what their pain points are. And are they willing to deploy the right person to that study? If they don't deploy the right person to that study, I will not get the right pain points, I will not find the right solution. Now, there is now, I would say, enough resource. I mean, 5, 10 years ago, there was less. Today, there is more knowledge and more resource, and there's more transparency. I can easily pick up a phone with clearing agents, go and visit their cold rooms, and get information for myself. I don't need to wait for someone to tell me something. But ultimately, it comes down to where is the return? Because another day, it's a business enterprise. For me as SILPAC, the return was if I develop a product and I start selling it, that's my return. I don't charge for the development. When I'm not selling the product anymore, then I need to finance it because I've got to use resources. I've got to use, maybe a 3D printer to do some, mock-ups and things like that. So that is always a constraint that we have seen historically. And I think it's going to remain. But when you ask the question of who can take it up, it depends on where the benefit lies. So when we had Flora Holland taking up a lot of these exercises, they could see an immediate improvement, or they could see a benefit to them or their members. So it made sense. Maybe you've got the Kenya Flower Council who can take it up on behalf of their members. Or again, UKID or USAID or some NGO that promotes business efficiencies can take it up. But ultimately, resources are there. Tapping into those resources are expensive. That's the only linkage that we need to bring together.
My question to both Nick and Raphael, are you convinced about the arguments by Parisha, and is there any way that these are some of the strategies or thoughts that come into your mind when you think about how do we push that envelope to create innovative solutions? The idea is there, but will you really push that envelope to get some of these things done with your leadership as a buyer, as a seller?
I think the industry as is very receptive to innovation. If you look at the changes that have happened in the last, say, 4 years in terms of packaging, there's quite a lot of development that has been some forced by situations and circumstances, but still happened. And so part of it is, if you go to the airport right now, compared to 4 years ago, there's a lot more palletized product than there was before. In flowers, for instance, there's a lot more newer designs of boxes than there were before. So I think adoption is there. The willingness is there. I think it's about having these collaborative discussions, because I think most of the successes have come up out of collaborative engagements and collaborative projects that I have run. I would say sea freight has, for instance, the packaging around sea freight came around as part of a discussion and as part of a collaborative engagement between the funders then and the stakeholders in the first shipments that happened. And those were the discussions where myself and SILPAC, for instance, were on board, and we were able to keep that going. And that has became a success in terms of selection of boxes. Not to say that that is the end of it. It's just the beginning. There is a lot that can be done to improve. And so I think the industry as is very receptive to innovation. I've seen people drop SFK over time. If you go to the airport today, you'll find probably 60% of flowers, or probably slightly less or more than that without SFK, which was not the case 5 years ago. And I think people are getting it as time goes by. Jeroen mentioned something like 1.5 kilos of SFK and packaging material that goes into a box. If you look at it from a cost perspective, it's a very expensive affair. If you're shipping 1,000 boxes and you have 1.5 kilos of SFK in each of the boxes, then you're paying for an extra 1,500 kilos of something you'll not use that will go to the bin. So basically, I think the discussions is, as Parit says, is where it pains more. And so for us, it pains that we pay for SFK that will go into the bin. It pains that labor in Europe is expensive. It pays that there is no labor in the first place in the UK. There's no sufficient labor to just remove the SFK itself. So basically, the more we reduce the work load from this end, the better for the business. So it's about cost effectiveness, and it pains more where money is affected and is touched on.
Raphael?
I'll visit something which Parit said on his presentation, that as an industry, we are very fragmented. We sat with Parit some time back, we developed a box, and then I don't know whether everyone onboarded. Christo and a team, there was a team which was funded by FLA-PLA to come up with a standard box. I don't know whether it saw light of day, it disappeared. There are so many boxes in the industry, which as much as Parit is happy in terms of we get more business, but for us as growers, it gets very expensive because we lack a standardized box or standardized packaging material, which gives you a specific way that for you to ship a flower or for you to make a flower box, you need to have the following like requirement, so that we end up having a similar box. Let's maintain that, let the brand change the way it changes, so that we end up having that flow. So at the end of the day, everyone gets their own box. You don't benefit on economies of scale, it becomes expensive. So for me, I think it's still good for like the all industry players to come on board. Again, freight agencies, the more we have an efficient box, the more they will carry more. But I don't know whether they like that also. So it's something which has to be like managed in a whole value chain, so that everyone benefits. And when everyone benefits, I believe the interest is pulled together. But I still believe it's both the customer and the grower who can really push this agenda forward. And then the rest, the manufacturers and the freight agencies will end up just onboarding it. So the task is on our side and the customer.
I want to ask one more question to all three of you before I open up to the audience to raise your questions, so be prepared. Is it a fact that industry plays, when I say industry plays, it includes me because I'm a media organization which talks about transportation logistics of different industry, and today we are talking about flowers and tomorrow we'll talk about other fresh fruits and vegetables. Are we not able to see the big picture? You have painted the big picture in terms of what is the future looks like in terms of various types of innovations. We do not want to see the big picture, and therefore we hesitate to make that initial investment, which is probably more than what in the normal circumstance, but the return on that investment in the long term is much bigger. So the question is that, are we not willing to see the big picture? As a result, we are not making that initial capital investment, which is probably not in the normal circumstances bigger than that. And but we are failing to see that in the long run it is going to be hugely beneficial.
I think back to the buzzword sustainability again. I think industry as is willing. The issue is, as we started by asking whether we are selling stories. We are looking at a story starting and being sold to all the stakeholders and being bought by a majority of it for it to thrive and become substance. Such forums don't exist in the current industry as is, because of the fragmentation and the fact that everyone holds the data that they hold and the information that they hold so dear to them. As much as we are very organized industry in the flower setup in Kenya, each of these growers and freight forwarders and all the players. Every one of them plays their own internal game, which is not sustainable long term. Because if we do not share data, if we do not share our pain points without fear of competition, without fear of someone else will make it better than I will, then we will not be able to succeed as a whole. And I think that is where we need to get to. We need to get to places of having these conversations cordially and having them in all truth and with data. Most of these people here today have lots of data that they have against or for whichever option they have gone for. But it's as good as in their computers. It's not anywhere else. It is not shared. It is not communicated. We don't have these forums where we discuss and tell you why we prefer a Zim box over a standard box, or why we prefer a cargo light box over a standard box. And so I think collaboration long-term is where the success lies. And I think once we are there, we will involve people like Jeroen and the likes to come into these conversations and help us technically to develop something that is standardized for the industry.
Raphael.
My view could be for us growers to come together and standardize our packaging processes. Let's only compete on the product. But as it is now, we are competing on the box. We are competing on everything. So at the end of the day, we lose. But can we develop our competitive advantage? I know how to grow. Let me grow well, because I can grow, get a very good flour, pack in a bad box. It goes again, it gives me a very big credit note, I suffer. So my thinking could be, we leave our disorganization and fragmentation and sit together and say, this is how the quality of the box we want, and this is the sizes we prefer. Then now let's go back ourselves and compete within our growing technique, so that it will be easy in terms of packaging. It create efficiency in terms of when manufacturing, when Parit and the team are ordering raw materials, it's easy because you see there's bulk and we all benefit. And then even on the freight agencies, they're able to build a very good and efficient pallet. So at the end of the day, we really need to share ideas, come together and square it out, because at the end of the day, we have the intention and the motive, but I think we just lack that coordination and organization. So at the end of the day, it's hurting all of us.
Before I ask Parit to respond to that specific question, like I said, just think about, imagine 4 years back, March 2020, what was this? Was the pandemic, there are no flights, passenger aviation almost came to a standstill across the world. And then like in 2 weeks, 3 weeks time, we had not the passengers sitting on the main deck of passenger planes. We had like packets of fresh fruits and vegetables sitting on 10A, 10B, 10C. The regulatory framework came on board to allow passenger planes to carry essential commodities in the passenger cabin. I think when situation pushes to certain limits, then probably we tend to be more imaginative, we tend to be more creative. But I don't know whether do we need some disasters of that magnitude to be more creative, more innovative. That's a thought that probably that we should think about it. But are we not seeing the big picture, or is there a hesitation to see the big picture? And is there a hesitation to make that initial, maybe a slightly increased capital investment, but then you have a long-term, you have a much better return on investment?
Yeah, I mean, there are two ways which I can answer that. One is, if we look at South America, they have standardized their boxes. There's a full box, there's a half box, there's a quarter box. The whole of Colombia and Ecuador, for their roses, have those 3 boxes. And it's standardized across the industry. So it is possible to have some kind of uniformity. If we look at bigger picture or challenges, the sea freight project was a child of COVID. We had all the challenges of air freight, we had the opportunities at sea freight level, and the lack of people to break pallets and the rest of it brought together a group of, I would say, like-minded invested individuals to say, okay, we need a solution. Let's put together a group that can deliver a possible solution on this. And again, it was a focus group derived from COVID. Today, you can argue there's no COVID, but there's issues with the Red Sea, so maybe sea freight might be taking a bit of a backseat, might come back after Red Sea issues are resolved. Air freight is already a challenge because since COVID, the routes have not been as amenable. So I think, always going to remain in a crisis mode one way or the other. The question is whether or not we can see beyond the crisis to make a development. And to that, I would have to answer yes to your question that we do not see the bigger picture at times, whether it's a box maker. I don't spend enough time thinking about, holistically, are we doing right by the industry? The growers and the buyers probably are also very busy trying to firefight. And a lot of firefighting means you don't have time to innovate. And this is where, we either wait for the next big crisis to change, or we can sit down and say, okay, look, we're going to spend this amount of time, resource, and capital and do it differently.
Thanks. It looks like we need to move into the next hot topic, which is the air freight versus sea freight. We have some wonderful lineup of speakers in that. I think with that note, I'd like to thank Nick, Raphael, and Parit for interesting insights into innovations in packaging and where do we stand and as flower and perishable logistic industry. Thank you so much. Great to have your insight. Thank you.